The cockpit shook hard as the FA-18F dropped into a tight spiral. Warning tones blared through Avery's headset one after another, the kind that meant impact wasn't a matter of if, but when. Red lights flared across the console while the nose of the jet dipped into empty sky. She felt the G's press into her chest. Her gloved hands clamped down on the flight stick as the voice in her ear rose to a shout. They were yelling for her to eject, shouting over one another, panic flooding every channel. The front seat was dead silent. Captain Blake wasn't moving, slumped forward with his helmet tilted against the panel. His last command had been mumbled. Then nothing. The airspeed was falling fast. Altitude dropping. The jet bucked as crosswinds caught the right wing. Avery adjusted with instinct, trimmed left, and pulled the stick towards centerline. Her pulse stayed steady. She blinked once. No flinch, no second guessing. Someone from the tower screamed again, ordering an ejection. She heard the word crater. Another voice was already counting down. She spoke into the comms, calm and low, cutting through every voice around her. Negative. I am flying. Then she moved. Fingers flipping switches, feet braced at the rudder, eyes locked on the HUD. The numbers weren't good, but they were hers now. She felt the aircraft lean with her input. The nose lifted. Vibrations smoothed. Drag softened. Behind her, the formation broke away. Jets peeled off to avoid the spiral. Another pilot cursed her name. Someone else begged for extraction protocol. She didn't answer. The stick no longer fought her. It moved with precision like it had been waiting for her this whole time. The aircraft wasn't screaming anymore. It was whispering. She banked slightly to level out. Altitude held at 6,800. Airspeed ticked up to 380 knots. The storm of commands on the radio went silent. The sky ahead cleared just enough to show the edge of the ridge. Not a wall now. A line. She toggled the channel, her voice steady. Eagle 2 to control. Pilot is unconscious. I am flying. Static answered her at first. Then came the clipped reply. Cleared for emergency return. She didn't thank them. Didn't hesitate. Just pulled tighter into the seat and began the descent checklist out loud, not for confirmation but rhythm. 1 breath in, 1 breath out. And then, with no celebration and no fanfare, she brought the bird home. Part 1. Introducing the main character. Avery, the invisible pilot. Avery lived in a trailer parked near the edge of a forgotten airstrip, where weeds pushed up through cracks in the concrete. The only sounds most nights came from distant trains, or the wind catching the corners of old sheet metal. Inside, everything had a place worn, but neat like her life, had been organized down to the breath. Her boots were scuffed, the soles starting to separate near the toes. She'd replaced the laces 3 times already, and the flight suit she wore had faded around the collar from sun and sweat. The helmet she carried looked older than the jet she flew in, scratched, no call sign, just a serial number so faint it barely showed. She kept a flight journal, not digital, just a thick notebook with clean handwriting across every page. Hours logged, temperatures noted, wind shifts recalculated by memory and gut. She never trusted software more than she trusted her own senses. A photo hung on the wall above the small table where she wrote at night. It showed a younger version of herself, maybe 15, grinning inside a beat-up crop duster with 1 patched wing. Her father, Tom Ross, had taken the picture with an old camera he refused to replace. That day, she'd flown solo for the first time, and he said she landed smoother than half the instructors he ever knew. Next to the photo was his leather flight book, creased from years of handling. It was full of checklists, diagrams, little notes in the margins that made her smile when she let herself read them. She didn't open it often, but when she did, it reminded her of who she was before the system tried to erase it. Avery had once been the youngest pilot in her unit, razor sharp on systems and faster than most with emergency protocols. Her instructors whispered about red flag placement before she'd even earned her deployment stripe. Then came the report. Another trainee had nearly crashed because of an engine fault someone had already logged. Avery backed the report. She named the officer who signed off on that bird. The fallout was quiet, but final. Her name slid to the bottom of rotation lists. Her evaluations grew cold. They didn't remove her. They didn't need to. They just made sure she stayed invisible. That was 2 years ago. Since then, she flew sims after hours, manually calibrated systems when no one asked her to, and kept logging hours no one reviewed. Her fingertips knew the startup sequences of 6 aircraft models. Her brain stored more flight data than most squad leaders' briefings. She never raised her voice, never asked for recognition, but she never stopped flying. The trailer smelled faintly of jet fuel and instant coffee. She liked it that way. The base left her alone, which suited her fine. At night, she boiled water for tea and filled her journal with numbers and notes, every letter as crisp as her movements in the cockpit. Sometimes she'd trace her father's handwriting with the tip of her finger, not to read, just to remember what steady looked like. He'd been gone 6 months. She didn't speak at the funeral. She didn't even sit in the front row. That night, she flew a full sim cycle alone. People thought silence meant weakness, that a quiet woman in the back seat was just along for the ride. They didn't realize she was logging every vibration, every delay and throttle, every inch of climb. They didn't know the hours she'd spent in that trailer with wind pushing against the aluminum siding, or how often she practiced emergency landings by muscle memory until her wrists ached. She didn't tell them because it wouldn't matter. She was never flashy, never the first one through the door or the last to leave. She just did the work. Avery didn't fly for credit. She flew because flying made sense when the rest of the world didn't, because every aircraft, even the broken ones, gave her back something no person had in a long time: trust. Part 2. Setting the scene. The world that forgot her. The airbase came alive before sunrise, humming with activity and hierarchy. Jets lined the tarmac in precise formation, their canopies catching the early light like polished glass. Crews moved with speed and order, their routines choreographed by rank, reputation, and unspoken rules. Pilots walked like they owned the runway. Their suits were tailored patches, pressed visors mirrored to reflect pride more than protection. They joked loud through casual glances and spoke names like titles earned from being seen. Avery stepped out of the transport van alone. No one greeted her. She held her helmet by the strap, tucked a clipboard under her arm, and walked like she'd been here 100 times without ever leaving a mark. Her flight suit didn't fit snug at the waist. The tag on her chest was frayed at the edges, tilted slightly to one side. The boots she wore had dust in the creases and leather thinned out from use. She passed a group of younger pilots heading to briefing. One of them slowed, glanced at her, then grinned without stopping. Asked if she was crew or contractor. Said the food tents were in the other direction. Avery didn't respond. She didn't break stride or shift her eyes. She'd heard some version of that before. The inside of the squadron building was cooler, but the chill had nothing to do with temperature. She stood near the wall in the briefing room, away from the rows of chairs filled by men who leaned back with crossed legs and idle confidence. No one offered a seat. A colonel walked in, flipped through a flight manifest, and called out names without looking up. When she said Captain Ross would be co-pilot on Eagle 2, a few heads turned. Someone near the front laughed under their breath. "Back up, Barbie," that's what one of them muttered. Another said something about spare helmets and hand-me-down gear. Avery didn't flinch. She stood straight and silent, her hands still at her sides. One pilot angled his phone toward her and took a photo. It would end up on a private chat within the hour, captioned with a joke about extra weight. No one thought twice about it. No one thought of her as a pilot at all. On the prep deck, the gap between perception and reality got wider. Flight crews moved around jets with practiced speed. Pilots adjusted their gear, their suits snug with sponsor patches stitched neat across the chest. Avery's suit bore no such marks. The cuffs were stretched. Her gloves were utility grade, not customized. She moved with precision but without presence. A ground tech squinted at her as she approached the hangar, asked if she was in the right place, told her this bay was for combat birds, not maintenance. She gave no reply, just walked toward the aircraft assigned to her name like it had always been hers. Her pilot, Captain Heron, already stood nearby, helmet on posture, relaxed. He didn't look at her when she approached, just climbed the ladder and took his place without a word. Avery followed. She climbed into the rear seat, secured her harness, and began her checks without being told. The cockpit hummed to life around her. Below, a pair of junior officers watched through the hangar glass. One leaned into the other and whispered something about a scheduling mix-up. The other just shrugged. Said she just needed to breathe and not touch anything, that the jet could fly itself. The canopy lowered, the cockpit sealed. All the jokes faded into silence once the engine started up. Inside the plane, her hands moved with steady precision. Each switch, each system checked by memory and feel. The space became familiar, almost quiet, even with the engines warming up. No one watching thought she belonged there. No one believed she'd actually do anything that mattered. But she didn't need them to believe. She just needed the jet to fly. And it would. It always had. Part 3. Conflict being dismissed before the flight sub. Part 3.1. Mockery in the briefing room. The briefing room smelled like coffee and dry erase markers. Pilots lounged in their chairs, feet stretched out, some scrolling through their phones without looking up. A few joked quietly under their breath, loud enough to be heard, but just soft enough to dodge responsibility. Avery stood near the back wall, clipboard in hand, waiting. She didn't lean or fidget. She just stood quiet, still, like someone used to watching a room move without her. Lieutenant Colonel Price walked in all business, flipping through her flight sheet without making eye contact. She called out names quick and efficient until she landed on Captain Ross for rear seat on Eagle 2. There was a beat of silence, then a chuckle from the front. One pilot turned his head, then nudged the guy beside him. Said something about backups and luck of the draw. Another snorted and shook his head, already looking at Avery like she was a joke. Jason Cole didn't say much at first. He just raised his phone and angled it toward her without asking. The shutter clicked once, then he tapped the screen a few times. A few more chuckles rippled through the room. Someone asked if they were bringing her along to babysit the checklist. Another offered to lend her a helmet from the museum display in the hall. She didn't blink. Her eyes stayed forward. No shift in weight, no tilt of the head, nothing that gave them what they were hoping for. The photo went out before the briefing ended, captioned with a short line about ballast and prayers. It spread fast, but no one laughed too loud. They didn't need to. The tone had been set. She was the backup, the filler, the name they called when no one else picked up. Avery kept her posture straight. Her grip on the clipboard didn't change. She waited for the briefing to end like it was any other morning. No one asked her a question. No one invited her into the flight conversation. She wasn't expected to speak. She didn't. But when she left the room, she walked first. Not fast, not proud, just first. And not one of them knew that silence could hold so much weight. Sub Part 3.2. Forgotten in the Sky. The heat on the tarmac blurred the horizon. Jets shimmered under the rising sun, their bodies lined in clean rows ready for takeoff. Crew members moved fast, signaling, adjusting, checking off items without ever glancing toward the second cockpit seat. Avery climbed into the rear like she always had. No one helped. No one watched. Captain Heron had already sealed his helmet, his eyes locked forward like the back seat didn't exist. He ran through the initial call-outs aloud, more for habit than for her benefit. He didn't pause to check if she was keeping up. She was already ahead. Her hands moved over the panels, flipping switches in the right sequence, checking pressure, fuel trim. Every motion was quiet, efficient, exact. The cockpit came alive with hums and lights. The canopy lowered with a hiss, muting the world outside. Inside, Avery finished the pre-flight checklist without missing a beat. She adjusted her straps, checked her oxygen, calibrated her side of the controls. She didn't need an invitation. This wasn't new. Through the side panel, she caught sight of other jets rolling into position. They looked like they belonged. She looked like a placeholder. The tower cleared them for departure. Heron pushed the throttle forward without a word. The jets surged ahead, the roar pressing them into their seats. She felt it all. The tension in the frame, the shift of weight, the way the aircraft responded, just a breath behind expectation. It wasn't perfect, but it flew, and she was already logging every detail in her mind. Once they leveled off, Heron made small adjustments and called headings in clipped tones. He didn't ask for feedback, didn't need her voice in the loop. She gave it anyway quietly. She confirmed altitudes, adjusted cabin pressure, compensated for drag. If he noticed, he didn't say. Outside, the sky stretched in every direction. Inside, her world was numbers, switches, and the weight of silence. Not hostile, just hollow. They flew in formation, part of a polished drill team that looked flawless from the ground. From her seat, Avery saw every micro-delay, every slight slip in timing. She adjusted before they became problems. No one acknowledged it. No one knew she was doing more than breathing. But she knew. She had always known. The best flights didn't draw attention. They just held together when no one else was watching. Part 4. Plot twist. When everything falls apart. Subpart 4.1. Collapse at 10,000 feet. They were climbing through 9,000 feet when Avery heard it. A dry cough, sharp and short, coming through her headset just above the mic threshold. She didn't look forward, just noted the time and checked his vitals on the console. His heart rate was climbing. Respiration shallow. Environmental controls looked normal, but she turned them up anyway, just a few clicks. The captain cleared his throat and muttered something about the heat, said to keep tracking. Avery said nothing. She adjusted cabin pressure again and watched the numbers. At 10,000 feet he pulled right but overshot the trim. The jet wobbled slightly before settling. She adjusted flaps from her side without announcing it. He coughed again, louder this time. One hand lifted to his helmet, hovered, then dropped. She could hear the change in his breathing. Quick inhales, a pause, then a long exhale like someone trying to push through. Her eyes didn't leave the HUD. She noted the lag in his movements. Inputs that used to come smooth now looked sluggish, almost delayed. Then his left hand slipped from the stick. He caught it once, barely, then slumped forward, shoulders dipping toward the panel. The jet tilted, just a few degrees at first, then more. Altitude started to drop. Airspeed dipped. A warning tone screamed through the cockpit. She didn't ask for confirmation, didn't wait for permission. Her hand moved to the manual override. One smooth motion. Systems flipped. Control shifted. She took the stick. The jet bucked hard, pulled right nose, dipping fast. Wind shear dragged across the wings as the bird began to spiral. Her headset filled with voices. Eagle 2. You are off path. Co-pilot, do you copy? Do you need extraction? Someone screamed for her to eject. She didn't answer. She pulled left, trimmed hard, throttled down. The jet resisted for a second, then gave. Altitude 9,200, still falling. She leveled the wings and adjusted yaw. Nose angle too steep. She softened it by instinct, feet braced, hands steady. The plane shook beneath her, a deep, groaning vibration like the airframe itself was unsure. But she wasn't. The right wing twitched again. She compensated with flaps, corrected drag. The controls stopped fighting her. She checked the captain. Still slumped, still breathing, but completely out. Voices kept shouting in her ear. They wanted answers. They wanted action. She gave them both. Pilot is unconscious. Full control is with me. Her voice cut through the noise. The silence that followed meant they heard her. At 8,100 feet, the spiral eased. The gauges began to stabilize. She adjusted heading, reset trim, called in for emergency return. Control gave her clearance without question. No one told her to eject again. She didn't look down, didn't flinch, just focused on what came next. The checklist was already in her head, and now finally so was the plane. Sub-Part 4.2, the flight no one expected her to fly. The jet responded to her hands like it had been waiting for her all along. Every adjustment she made smoothed the turbulence, countered the drag, and held altitude where it needed to be. Her fingers moved with calm certainty, each control checked and corrected before the instruments even caught up. Below her, the terrain stretched out in quiet grids. To the left, the ridge faded into farmland. To the right, just sky. The formation that had flown with them was gone, now pulled back for safety, watching from a distance. A voice came through again, sharp and nervous. They told her she was off pattern, that she needed to stabilize or eject, that the weight was too much, that she'd never make it to base. She didn't respond. She adjusted the throttle by 3%, trimmed nose up by 2 degrees, and eased the roll until the line on the HUD leveled out. Her silence wasn't defiance. It was focus. Captain Heron's vitals blinked steady but low. She checked them twice, then locked the screen. There was nothing more to do for him. Not yet. She toggled comms once, said she was returning to base solo, asked for clear airspace. The reply came fast, full clearance, no more instructions. Every gauge on the panel told her this was borderline. Fuel was good, but the bird was heavy. Speed was solid, but wind shear was unpredictable. She compensated anyway. Her left foot braced on the rudder, right hand balancing roll, left hand throttling into descent. The aircraft held steady like it had remembered something too, like it trusted her. Noise on the channel faded. A few voices murmured questions, but none gave orders. She had already passed the point where panic mattered. The sun caught the edge of the canopy. Her helmet cast a faint reflection in the glass. It showed no call sign, just scratches, sunwear, and a number no one knew. She called her glide path, calculated distance by instinct, wind crossflow at 6 knots, adjusted left, stabilized. Altitude dropped in clean increments. Her descent arc was textbook. Her voice didn't waver. She didn't ask for help. She didn't need confirmation. At 5,000 feet, she checked the emergency gear deploy. It responded on the first try. She smiled once. Small, almost nothing. She radioed her final heading. Confirmed runway. They told her fire crews were standing by. She said nothing in return. As the base came into view, she made her final adjustment. Nose down 2 degrees, speed down to landing range. The Super Hornet moved smooth as glass. She ran the landing checklist by memory. Landing gear down, flaps extended, systems holding. In the final seconds before touchdown, no one spoke. Not in her headset, not on the ground. Everyone was watching. Avery didn't look at the crowd, didn't need applause. She flew that bird like it had always been hers. And now, finally it was. Part 5. The Climax Landing. More Than a Jet Sub. Part 5.1. Descent into Silence. The runway stretched out like a ribbon of quiet steel. Heat shimmered off the pavement, blurring the edges of paint lines and casting slow-moving waves into the air. The sky above was cloudless still. Personnel gathered near the control tower, their boots-planted heads tilted toward the horizon. Some held radios in limp hands, others just watched, waiting. The tower confirmed final approach, but no one spoke after that. The only sound came from the soft hum of ground vehicles idling along the edge. Even the wind felt muted. The jet came into view low and even. Its shadow touched the runway before the tires did. Every eye followed its descent, tracking every detail like it might disappear if they blinked. Avery kept her hands steady. Her breathing matched the rhythm of the descent. The checklist had already played out in her head one last time. The wheels hit the tarmac with 2 perfect thumps, not hard, not rushed, just clean contact. Brakes engaged, flaps adjusted. The aircraft slowed across the runway in a straight line, then rolled to a gentle stop near the emergency crews. No one moved at first. Not the medics, not the flight techs, not even the officers standing with arms crossed behind the safety cones. The canopy opened. Sunlight hit the cockpit and spilled across her shoulders. Avery sat still for a moment, helmet still in place, fingers resting near the console. Then she unlatched the strap, pulled it free, and lifted the helmet from her head. Her hair was damp. Her face was calm. She climbed down the ladder without help, 1 step at a time, boots meeting the ground with quiet, final weight. She didn't look around. She didn't speak. She just stood next to the jet like it belonged to her. No one clapped. No one called her name. They just watched, stunned into stillness by what they'd just seen. The woman they had dismissed, mocked, and ignored had brought a fighter jet home solo. Not in theory, not in simulation. In real time, in real sky. The fire crew stayed in place. The medics moved only to retrieve the unconscious pilot. They didn't ask her what happened. They already knew. Sub Part 5.2. A Name Finally Seen. The sun was just beginning to fall behind the hangars when Avery stepped onto the tarmac again. The air was cooler now, the lights softer, but the base still moved in its usual rhythm. Mechanics rolled carts across concrete, and the steady whine of turbines rose from a far hangar. She walked alone, her helmet in one hand, the other tucked into her jacket pocket. The leather-bound journal pressed against her side with every step. It shifted slightly familiar weight against bone and fabric. Ahead of her stood a new jet, clean from post-flight maintenance, its body catching the light in long glints of silver. A young crew chief knelt near the intake, pressing down the edge of a fresh decal. He didn't say anything as she approached. She stopped a few paces away and watched as he smoothed the name into place. The letters were simple. No call sign. Just one word. Ross. The crew chief stood, wiped his hands on his coveralls, and gave a quick nod. Said he didn't know what color she preferred. She said this was fine. The paint would cure in minutes, but it already looked permanent. Tucked under the cockpit rail, it didn't need to be big. It was just enough. Avery stepped closer. Her reflection ghosted across the canopy. Helmet under her arm. Wind catching the edge of her sleeve. She didn't touch the aircraft. She didn't trace the letters. She didn't need to. This wasn't a celebration. It wasn't a reward. It was a correction. Behind her, the base kept moving. Nobody gathered. Nobody clapped. But for the first time, they didn't look past her. She turned once, gave the jet a final look, and walked on. Not faster, not slower, just forward. Recognition hadn't changed her. It had just caught up. Avery had heard it when she was barely tall enough to see over the dashboard of that old crop duster. Her father's voice, low and steady, cutting through the hum of the engine. He told her the aircraft would always talk if she knew how to listen. He said if it screamed, you had to move. If it roared, you had to respect it. But if it whispered, that meant it trusted you. That whisper was the quiet between systems, the breath between switches. It was the sound no one else heard, the one that didn't need volume to carry meaning, the one you felt before you knew. She had chased that feeling her whole life, not for the rush, not for the credit, but because it told her who she was. Every hour logged, every flight run alone, every system memorized. It wasn't about proving herself to anyone else. It was about never forgetting what she could do. The world around her had measured value in titles, patches, and name tags. They had looked at her boots, her helmet, her silence, and decided she was nothing more than background. They mistook quiet for lesser. But she never flew to be noticed. She flew to stay ready. When the sky turned unpredictable and the voices around her cracked with panic, she didn't freeze. She didn't fold. She just listened. And when the jet whispered, she answered. She brought it home not because they trusted her, but because she had already learned to trust herself. In the end, she didn't need a call sign. She didn't need to shout. She had the sky, and it finally said her name. If this story made you feel something, share it. Pass it on to someone who's been overlooked, someone who's been quiet too long. Let them know this. You don't have to be loud to be ready. You just have to fly when it matters.